So welcome back. We are now going to launch into a conversation with the really, really insightful and wonderful Amy Tong. Amy Tong started off working for the state of California a couple years back in the State Water Resources Control Board, I think as a frontline analyst. And she's from Sacramento and worked her way up that agency, across to other agencies, up millions of other agencies, ultimately becoming the state's chief technology officer and the director of the State Department of Information Technology until 2022, when Governor Gavin Newsom named her as the Secretary of Government Operations for the state of California. I think I might have said yesterday that sounds boring, and it is, but it's really, really important. And the budget for government operations in California is bigger than the budget for the California community colleges, the California State University, and the state-funded part of the University of California put together. It is an enormous enterprise serving the people of California in myriad ways and agencies that serve the people served by this department. It is also an incredibly powerful driver of change and technology in the ways in which constituent service regulation occur, not just in California, but throughout the world. And Secretary Tong has been tasked by Governor Newsom to lead the state's efforts and strategy on generative artificial intelligence. And so there's no one better to give us some insight to the future and to help us grapple with some of the challenges and the great opportunities we've been talking over the last 2 days. Then Secretary Amy Tong, please welcome her to the stage. All right, so the last conversation we had just now on the stage, this format was it was bloody in the greatest way possible, right, Roger?
Yeah.
It was great. This one won't be that. We just started with Happy. I wanted to ask you first because Lark had chosen another song for your walk-up.
Oh?
And on the prep call, on the prep Zoom, I was uninspired by that song, so I went and asked ChatGPT. Secretary Amy Tong of the California Government Operations Agency is coming to be on a panel, and she's going to talk about this. What should be her walk-up song? And of course, gave me an instant response, highly confident, that it should be Happy by Pharrell.
Aww.
So now we want to assess it. So how did it do?
I like it. At least I recognized the song. That's a good start.
All right. There must be something that's written about GovOps or about you that just inspires happiness.
Well, I could share. So yesterday, my undersecretary, who was a state service, Miriam Ingenito, retired after 27 years of a state service. So on her last day, she's this huge Disney fan. So on the last day, we have a farewell for her. And as a surprise to her, 30 members of our team wear a Mickey ear. So you're talking about the happiest place on earth that she's going to retire to. She did say she's going to move into Disneyland. So I think ChatGPT just know that we are a happy workplace.
Well played, ChatGPT. I mean, it's a little disturbing also though, because that was not covered in the press or in any public venue. So ChatGPT was watching her retirement party. So it's fascinating that you're here on behalf of the administration, in part because I know from some of the conversations I've heard that there are folks in the state and maybe even in this room that think that generative AI should be under the Attorney General's office. Somebody should be, it's a crime and somebody should be shutting it down. And there are others that think it should be in the Economic Development Agency, and we should just be, sharing the gospel and the good word with everyone. But it's in GovOps. So can you give us some insight about what the governor's thinking, the administration is thinking about your agency and the values and the approach and the lens that you're bringing to the question of how should the state of California grapple with AI?
Yeah, well, perhaps the Attorney General and Didi Meyer, who runs our economic office, couldn't agree. So they're like, who can we find? Let's just give it to Amy. No, kidding aside, really, we look at this from the administration, and the governor and I talked about it a lot, is that there's obviously a lot of unknown about generative AI, right? AI itself, it's been in existence almost like by this race forever, but generative AI with last year's ChatGPT and all that, I'm sure I don't need to repeat all of that, really, elevated the conversation. And it's really the unknown, the uncertainty that really draw a lot of attention. So why in government operation? We are an entity, as you mentioned, thank you for the overview earlier, have a lot of responsibility to ensure the wellness of how the state operates. And in many of the cases, we are also, the governor called our agency the entrepreneurship agency, which means that we have this motto of, if we don't know about something, let's figure out a way to test it ourselves. So, obviously we have the pleasure of engaging great academia partner. I see one of them here, that Dean Jennifer Chase here is a partner to the administration while we're trying to learn more about generative AI. But at the same time, the governor has specifically issued an executive order for the state of California to roll out our sleeves and do POCs as a way of get a firsthand experience on what generative AI is and is not. And I think that is the reason why GovOp has the privilege to lead this work.
So it sounds like what you're describing is that the administration is approaching the regulatory side, the big picture policy side, by learning through doing, right? That you're through a series of projects and experiments and extensions and partnerships, that you're trying to understand how to approach it in the big picture, at least in part through learning in practice. Am I hearing you right?
That's exactly right. By way of learning, we obviously engage a lot of the industry partner. We have over 100 of those partners that are on our list that we constantly talk to. And we're obviously engaging with our academia partner, UC being part of it, Stanford is another one, and then as well as working with the CSU and the community college systems to get input, say, hey, how is this impacting your faculty? How is this impacting your student, or a combination of all of that? And then as well as within the state of California, at the end of the day, our end goal is, can we test as a way of utilize Gen AI to improve how our public service delivery to our constituent, in this case is the residents of California. But we also have a very robust, we call it the Homeland Security, but California version team in the Office of Emergency Services, which I also have the privilege to co-chair when it comes to cyber side of it, is what is generative AI would have if it gets to adversary's hand in terms of impacting to our critical infrastructure, our electric grid, and et cetera, et cetera. So is that comprehensive approach, if you will, that we consult with the experts, we hear from different perspectives while we're doing these trials in the state. And of course, the trial that are delivering services to support our residents, we have a huge community-based network that represents all walks of life, especially those are vulnerable and marginalized community, because we need to hear from them what is their acceptance with the services that might be utilizing a generative AI. And from all of these conversations, we're learning a lot how to take a very measured approach in evaluating this particular tool.
Because we're in the same region, even in my own city, we're trying to build housing. We have a gigantic backlog. We can't hire enough people. In the county, I think we have a 30% backlog in CalFresh. Folks cannot qualify, cannot get their food. They can't eat, essentially, just because there's no human judgment in the CalFresh eligibility process. It's entirely objective standards, and yet it still takes so long that the consequences on the street are very severe. And so we talked before the session about this question of do we have a choice to get in this? What are if California were to say, let's pause and think about it,
right?
What will happen? And you were talking also about adversaries, but then also what are the leaps forward that we might be with the problems that you're hoping if we get everything right enough, or we learn as we're doing it, what are you hoping that we might be able to achieve?
Right. So you brought up the CalFresh example, and really the labor shortage and just a skill shortage. Let me give you a specific example on one of the proof of concept that we're doing right now. Not related to CalFresh, but is related to inspection of medical and health facility. right? That those facility needs to be inspected on a regular basis so that they could get their permits renewed in order for those facility to continue to operate. What we are dealing with, I mean, our partner department working on this is Department of Public Health. And they came to us with a challenge they're facing. They said, we have tons of these facilities we need to inspect. We don't have enough of inspectors that are looking at this. And worse, after the inspector spend their time jotting down, walking through the facility, they literally have to go back and sit in their car, matching their findings to the various federal, state, or local regulations to see which one is compliant, which is not. And that took most of the time. And quite frankly, that type of work is not a high-value work for the inspector, probably otherwise would love to just go into more facility to do their observations. So the proof of concept that we're in the midst of doing that right now is using actually two companies applying their Gen AI technology to see how do they quickly matching this inspection node, whether it's a voice memo, whether it's a hand scribble, whether it's a nice typed out note, matching with the federal, state, and local regulations. And the time from a normally takes about 3 months to finish an inspection. You guys gonna quote me on this, huh? Don't quote me on this yet, because it's still in the pilot phase. It's probably down to a matter of hours. Matter of hours for that comparison. Now, one might immediately think, say, wait a minute, what does this mean? Is this how it's gonna change our labor workforce? And that is actually one thing we also are being very, very proactive on, is include our union representatives along. We didn't just keeping them on the sideline to see what's going on. We actually invited them to be part of the process, very early on to say, hey, this is where we're going, and we have a commitment from the state of California that Gen AI is not going to replace job, but it's an augmentation, and it's more of an efficiency thing, and it's not intended to replace any labor. And it's through that type of collaboration with our union representative, labor representative, we were able to continue on with this pilot. So,
you mentioned earlier the work with higher ed, and you mentioned the various institutions. And I should tell you right now, we never ever compare ourselves to one another, ever. This is like, that's forbidden. We don't do that. We don't see status. So what are your first impressions? You don't have higher ed and GovOps generally, but what are your first impressions about the readiness, the rich resources that higher ed and its students and its faculty and staff have to bring to the table, and how the institutions are stepping up, or how they might do better, or how, even not at the regental or the chancellor level, but faculty in the math department at Laney College, for example, might be able to help with the effort that you're undertaking.
Got it. Well, you did say the panel earlier was more bloody and all that. So everybody already got their expectation high. And now I see everybody's eating, so you should be all happy. So if I could be a little bit more candid about this. Government operation, we're not the first liaison, if you were, to work with higher ed, the CSUs and UC. And when it comes to CCC, I work with a colleague of mine, Secretary Stuart Knox, and work with the CCC system. But we do have a system that you might be familiar with, a cradle-to-career data system. And our agency also are involved in working with the governor's office, specifically using cradle-to-career to build this master, a career master plan. So from that aspect, we have probably enough of understanding, I know, although not comprehensive, about the various characteristics of the education. When it comes to specific Gen AI, I would say right now, the community college system, I don't know who's here from the community college system, yay. All right, there's many of them, yes, thank you. You guys are awesome in terms of being open about what the industry could work with you in building content that, to support the faculty and support the students, as well as internship opportunity, hands-on opportunity, I should say that, to really get the students ready. The CSU and the UC, we are working very, very gently with them. We have CSU partner here. I feel like I'm going to be in trouble now. I have friends on CSU, and I'm a product of CSU, if that gives me any grace here. As well as the UC, like I said, we have a great partner from Berkeley and many other campuses that obviously they have a system. They wanted to make sure the faculty has a lot to say in terms of how best to introduce, I would say not necessarily the utilization of Gen AI tool, but the training and development of the Gen AI, impacting what the faculty will do and what the faculty will translate to their students. So we're having very robust dialogue, and we're really hoping to land more closer collaboration with them. Because at the end of the day, the governor really have one goal that we want to achieve, is that we want to elevate all boats. What that means is when it comes to students, or we're coming to the future workforce, we want the Californian students, or Californian in general, to be best equipped, so that when 35 of the 50 AI companies that are headquartered in California, when they're looking at where they're hiring their talent, we want them to look at California first, because we should be the best prepared. So that's the single goal we're striving to.
That's the last segue you highlight, I think, is a really interesting one too, which is we had a panel earlier, and it struck me. Maybe it's because I'm going in this, maybe go in the Senate in a couple of months, which was, we shouldn't do, if we didn't do any of this, we just put all the money and double down on education funding. Which struck me because I'm an educator. My first one was yes, and then I thought about it for a second. And the governor will say this: we increased education funding by 40% since 2017, and we mostly don't notice and we were able to do that. And here's the kicker: we're able to do that pretty much only because of revenues from the technology sector. That our budget surpluses that funded the upswing in higher ed funding before we hit this new chasm, they're almost entirely because of capital gains and IPOs and stuff in the technology sector. And so the choice that sometimes we frame up, which is, do we develop this sector, which if you ask Europeans, they'll tell you the one thing that makes America economically much stronger than them is tech and innovation. Mm-hmm. And within the US, the one thing that makes California stand out financially in order to invest in these things. So I know this. You mentioned this is important for the governor, that sort of California leading the way. So I wanted to ask you about the higher ed role in that space, because we've the UC and CSU and the land grant institutions across the country, they emerged in part to do the same thing, but for agriculture. So how UC Davis or Cal Poly don't do the research, develop the expertise, develop the workforce, and be out in the state, transferring the knowledge and the guardrails and everything else. Do you see through some of this work the role for, in addition to building better math assessments and that sort of thing inside the system, a role that higher ed has to play in the broader effort to deploy itself in society in California to advance? So
I'm really glad, you teeing this question that way. Even though earlier we're talking about the workforce development, the future workforce, getting California ready to be the talent that this company can really acquire is one thing. A huge part that we would love to see more of, and I know currently there's challenges because simply of the high cost of these GPUs and access to that, but a role that we would love to have the academia do more is how do you be the checks and balance of these companies who are growing so fast on their end. And I know that we heard this when we were talking to many of the academia, even the private colleges too, that we do not have access or not fast enough to tap into the compute power that's necessary to do our own development in terms of that checks and balance role. And I think this is an area we would love to explore more. And I know this is something that we have also further engaged our academia partners, as well as many of the policymakers, to talk about how do we equip or have an ecosystem that supports our higher ed to play that role. Because without it, then it's almost like the industry we're going on. The self-checking, in my opinion, doesn't really work. You do need a third party. So the red teaming, the responsible AI, all of those, I do think that it would be a great role that our academia partner can play.
So where do you think we're headed? Are you optimistic we're going to be able to get this done? And do you think, is part of the game plan also for California to lead the world in Gen AI sort of regulation framework, workforce development? So we've talked about Gen AI as a potential to dramatically improve services. And then you also the governor had to deal with the legislation this year to sort of that threatened companies that allowed their AI to create a global apocalypse or what have you, right? So I know you're dealing with all of those issues too, but that question raised who's at the table and who's leading that work. There's the European Union is as well, but where do you think California is going to be in its ability to regulate, to deploy, not just in sort of the mandates on the companies, that for sure, but also in designing the institutions and supporting the change makers in institutions that are going to be delivering and asking the right questions along the way?
Yeah, I think California has to play that leadership role, not because we have this obligation that the responsible use of AI is so important, because this AI is really not a technology conversation, it's a society impact conversation, right? Two, if you're looking at what's going on around the world, the different focuses, what best position California to do it, right? Giving all the headquarter company here and the great academia that we have in the state of California. I mean, if we don't tap into these resources to help us to figure out what is the best regulation, the best guardrail, the best way to find that right balance of while supporting an ecosystem that supports economic as well as innovation, but also very, very responsible. We're going in with our eyes wide open. This is, to me, a very healthy tension that California is in the middle of. And I think this is where we are engaging. That's why you see the governor have said in his statement that we are engaging all the partners that are willing to help us to do this. So that's why I'm also very, very appreciative that you are inviting me here to share a little bit of insights on what the administration is doing.
All right, Secretary Amy Tong, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.